Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Grumpy Bagel Podcast. This is a podcast that is primarily about knitting, but occasionally includes some of my new adventures into hand dyeing yarn, and even more occasionally some time devoted to my obsession with all things that related to the Phantom of the Opera. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Megan. You can find me on Ravelry and on Instagram as the Grumpy Bagel, and I'm coming to you today from Central California. It is the 23rd of January today, so the first episode of 2018. So I'm not really into New Year's per se, but it is always a nice kind of reset to have when January rolls around, so gonna try to get into some. I changed the intro, as you may have noticed, to try to explain exactly what I'm doing here, which is something that I guess I take for granted on other podcasts, but Grumpy Bagel isn't exactly explanatory as to what I talk about here as some other podcast names are, so I thought I'd give that a try, just let you know what you're in for. So as I said, I will have a little bit of dyeing to show you, nothing impressive, and then so just some little samples, and this will be the return from the vaults of the theater, my Phantom of the Opera segment, which you've been so kind as to stick around for. So without any further ado, I'll get into the finished objects, which is probably mainly what you're here for. Let's see, the first finished object that I have is a Graham hat, which is by Jennifer Adams. I used some of that delicious Dragonstone yarn that I showed you in my acquisitions last time. So it's from Destination Yarn in the suitcase base. Sorry, helicopter. I don't know if you've heard a helicopter on here before. Lots of airplanes, but that might be the first helicopter. And so this is a worsted base, 100% superwash merino. I used size 7 needle, US 7 needles for the brim. It's hard to see because, so here's the basic brim, and it's a free pattern, so I don't mind telling you. And then the body is into broken rib up through here, and then you go up a needle size, so I used number 8 needles on here. I did, I think, everything to pattern except for, this is for my mom, by the way, and she wanted more brim to be able to flip up if she wanted to. So I added another inch to the basic ribbing at the bottom, so 4 inches of ribbing altogether. And then same, everything for the body and the crown. So there is that. I really like how it came out. And then I used the second skein of that for a hat for myself. And I made the Bankhead hat, which is by Susie Gorley. The only thing I changed on here was to make standard 1x1 ribbing instead of twisted ribbing, as the pattern says. That's just personal preference for me. Very rarely do I enjoy the look of twisted rib. A lot of people that go nuts for it, and it's just not really for me. And I like how a regular rib ends up working in a garment or accessory as well. I also just changed up now that you can really tell, some of the decreases up at the crown. Right over here I made a center double decrease instead of knit 3 together. Just centered it more to my taste, I guess. So this is my first entry into the Bakery Bears Climb Every Mountain cal, which is new cal that they have going for the entirety of the year. Last year they had what they called the Fog Along, which is a race to go around the world. And there was the knitting team and a running team. So however many miles the runners ran, that could be translated into miles that could go around the world. And then the knitters, they got allocated a certain amount of miles for different kinds of projects that they knit, and that could add up to their miles to go around the world. So we're doing something similar this year, but instead of going around the world, we are climbing mountains. So, and it's the Bakery Bears, so I had to knit a Bankhead hat. That is one of the things that they're famous for. And a special thing that you can do, which I have opted to try to do, is you take up the mountain your rucksack. to keep you warm as you are getting colder and colder. And sorry, my nose is itching again today. That's bad. But Kay has given us the option of filling our rucksack with 5 different items to keep us warm. And so I think it's a hat, a cowl or scarf, shawl, mittens, socks, and a long sleeve garment. And if you complete those within the year of the knit along, you are entered in for a very, very special prize drawing, which of course, who wouldn't want that, right? So this is also my first item for my rucksack as we climb up the mountains. So it's a bankhead hat. My next finished object is an Anguli cowl, which is by Hilary Smith Callis. So I'm trying to figure out how the best way to show this to you is. It's got a little crease in it, and it's blending in, unfortunately, with my wall. So this is a asymmetrical cowl by Hilary Smith Callis, and let me just put it on. Maybe it'll be easier to see that way. Kind of set up here. So it is worked flat. It is not worked in the round. This is paid for pattern, but you knit it flat, and then sorry, up a little bit. There. And it's shaped kind of dramatically, and then you join in the back to give you this really interesting, like it's not quite a kerchief style, but this is the way that we would wear a lot of our shawls, but it made into a cowl version, so without all the fuss of the ends and everything, which I really love. And I used, so let me show you the back then. Try and make sense of it. So it comes up this way, and then you finish at the back this way, and this is your seam. So the yarn that I used for this was some Hazelknits Entice, which is their MCN blend, which I bought when I was in Portland a few months ago. And it is, like I said, it's a merino cashmere nylon blend, and it is absolutely scrummy. See me a little bit through there, and cat hair. There we go. So I use for my main color this red, which is called Vamp, and the contrasting color, which is the gray, which is called Quill, which is a really beautiful gray with some brown undertones in it. So here's a more striped section that you can see there. That's a little truer to color. And this is I think this is one of the best MCNs that I've worked with in a while. It's a 3-ply, so it's nice and plump and good stitch definition, and it's just like butter. It's so soft. And I only made one modification on here, which is to start a certain amount of decreases a little later, so that you could end up having the stripes sort of match here on the back, which other people have done a lot better than I. This is a horrible seam, but it helps my obsessive tendencies to be able to know that somewhere in the back they match, even though it's going to be scrunched up at the back of my neck and no one's going to be able to see it. So that is first Anguli. I had lots of yarn left over, so I went ahead and made a second one, but with just the colors reversed. And this is how that one came out. So with Quill as the main and Vamp as the contrast. So I tried that one on too, just to say that I did. And I used US 4 needles on this one. I think this one's my favorite, to be perfectly honest, as much as I love the red. And so as you see, it's striped. I did not carry up my contrasting yarn on this edge for every time there was one of these longer gaps in between, but once we got to one of these where they're a lot closer together, then I went ahead and carried it up. So it's lots of ends to weave in, but I think I did a fairly decent job of it. There's some little gaps there, but that can't always be avoided, but I think it went all right. I didn't mind it. Takes maybe half an hour to do if you're really studious about it, but that is my second and probably favorite Anguli cowl. Just in time for another airplane. There. So that's all that I have for finished objects, so that will lead us into works in progress. And the first work in progress that I have is yet another sock head hat by Kelly McClure. See, got my yarn caught in. There we go. So I'm making this one out of my Nerd Girl Yarns Astral, which I showed you last time. It's her 2-ply superwash merino nylon and a gold stellina base. And this is out of Honey, You Should See Me in a Crown, which is a BBC Sherlock reference to Moriarty. So I've just finished the rib here. Let me show it to you in the cake. I love this color so much. So I started out with US 1s for the brim, which is 4 inches of ribbing, and then you switch to stockinette for the body. And I was still using 1s, and you can see how the colors spiral really nicely in the brim here. But once I had gotten to the stockinette portion, it started to pool in a way that I really didn't like. Like, I could suppose this can be considered pooling too, but this was more stacking, that colors kind of halted where they were and just started building up on themselves. So I had this big vertical stripe of purple and then of yellow, green, and red, and it was just staying there. It wasn't moving around the way I wanted it to. So it was only a few rows that this had happened to, so I pulled that out, back to the ribbing, and then started the stockinette with US 1.5, which is just, a 1/4 of a millimeter bigger than the 1s, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this is over, 144 stitches. And with yarn this fine, it is going to add up really quickly. But since I did do that, this is how the colors are turning out now. They're much better distributed, I think. And I'm much happier with the results. So it's a little looser at the top, but that's okay. It's supposed to be a really slouchy hat, and the brim is at a gauge that I'm comfortable with, and that's more important to me than what the body of the head is going to be like. Because, like I said, it's going to end up slouching anyway. So I'll show you the back here too. See how the colors have distributed. So that is my sock head hat. In the over a month since I last spoke to you, I've put in a lot of work on my Cozy Memories blanket, and I've finally gotten caught up with all of my colors of all the scraps from patterns projects that I've made and minis that I've gotten. So I am finally caught up here. I'm in my 5th row. So let's see, the little progress keeper is where I was last time I recorded. And I've worked my way all the way up to here. Trying to make sure I show you everything nicely. So up here, and here are the 2 squares from my Anguli cowls. And the top row is all of the minis from the Jane Austen Little Stitches club that I was a member of last year. So that is all caught up. So like I said, I am making my squares 51 stitches, and I've ended up deciding to do 15 squares across, and I'm aiming for 20 rows high. Who knows when that'll be done, but it's a nice long-term project, and I'm very happy with how it's turning out. I have also completed another square or panel for my literary blanket, which is made up of all Canon hand dyes minis. This one is out of the Victorian Horror mini set that I showed you a couple episodes ago. So I'll try to make sure everything gets in there. So this is a set of 6 novels or short stories, and a poem in there as well. So that worked out perfectly for the layout that I have for these panels, which is 4 across and 6 high. So I put them in order of publication from, well, turns out the first one that I did was the latest, so latest to earliest published. This is always so awkward to show. So this line here, this is The Hound of the Baskervilles, Arthur Conan Doyle. These lovelies are The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This stripe is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And this stripe that was originally intended to be Dracula, actually, but I repurposed it and renamed it for Jane Eyre for reasons, because the yellow going orange and red and black reminds me of fire, which, Mr. Rochester's secret tower room, spoilers. And while Jane Eyre isn't necessarily, it probably wouldn't ever really be classified as a horror novel, there are certainly elements to it that are definitely disturbing. Mr. Rochester's secret tower room. So I put that in there. And this stripe is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And the top stripe is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So I got that done. I had been savoring these and keeping them very safe for a long time, but I really wanted to get a move on and finish those, so I could also move on to the next work in progress to show you, which is in my Jane Austen bag from Little Skein. So, as I said last time, when I first showed you this as a stash acquisition, I got a set of 10 gram minis, which I don't normally do. Each of these squares only takes 5 grams. So I had enough left over to work on a striped cowl. And I'm using, I've changed it so much I'm not even sure if I should technically say I'm using a pattern on this. But this is the striped cowl by Mathilde Scar, which I'm using for these minis. So let's see if I can rearrange this. So see all the colors from the Hound of the Baskerville stripe? I have been putting them into the striped cowl. So it's worked circularly and it'll be joined with Kitchener stitch later. I have a provisional cast on at the bottom. So I'm using up the remainder of all those minis as stripes in here. And for the contrast color, I am using the contrast color that was provided in that mini set, which is this gray, it was a dark and stormy night, which is absolutely lovely. So that's what I'm putting in here. So all of those minis end up being about almost a skein and a quarter with their yardage. And obviously I only have one skein of the gray. So I'm not there, the stripes will not be equal because I don't want to run out of the gray somewhere through and be absolutely devastated by what has happened. So I'm getting about 15 or 16 rows for each mini out of here, and so I've calculated if I use 12 rows of the gray in between each, I will have enough to finish this project and maybe have a little bit left over. But that's something I feel safe with doing. I'm not going, hopefully this will not end in tears and despair, although that would be appropriate, let's face it. So I finished the Hound of the Baskervilles colors and I'm just starting with the picture of Dorian Gray colors. So that is my last work in progress. I'm using size 2 US 2 needles. I'm not using nearly as many stitches as the pattern calls for. I'm using 75 stitches because I'm modeling this after the duotone cowl that I showed you a while ago, which was not pink, it was purple and yellow. But and I cut down on stitches on that one too, but I'm really happy with the size that created. So this is really based off of that in terms of sizing. It just fits around the needles. And after blocking, it'll bloom a little bit, and I think once I'm done with it, I will be very, very happy with it. So I'm gonna call it my Victorian horror cowl. So that's it for my works in progress, which leads us on to acquisitions. And as I mentioned earlier, a new year is always a nice time to reset and rethink your habits and what you want to do. For instance, I would like the planes to stop flying over at the only part of the day where it actually matters what sound is coming through on the microphone, but oh well. So one of the things I definitely want to do is to start working more from my stash and not be so, PayPal button happy when it comes to shop updates and things, and to just really think through what I'm buying. That being said, there were some lovelies that I had been thinking about for a while and decided to get, and it's been a while since I last recorded, so things kind of build up, and a couple packages just arrived yesterday, so yeah. First thing that I want to show you is I treated myself to Nerd Girl Yarn's Who's Your Doctor Club, which is a quarterly club that gives you sometimes exclusive colorways that are inspired by Doctor Who. Some of them may be added to the shop as regular colorways later. They may not. So the first one, like I said, is from last month, and seeing as I got the second month's in the mail yesterday, I'm pretty sure everyone has gotten December's color already. So you get to choose your base for your 3-month club. I chose Bounce and Stomp, which is her, I think, the most popular sock base that she has. 4-ply, fingering 75-25 superwash merino nylon. And December's colorway was Vincent and the Doctor, which I really like because it was kind of not your standard exploding TARDIS color, which people think of when you say Vincent and the Doctor. Even though that's not technically from the Vincent episode, this, I think, reflects more of Van Gogh's styles of painting just on its own. But you still get some lovely TARDIS blue in there. And I think this is modeled specifically after the painting of the church that Vincent makes in that episode. And you find out that the monster's hiding inside. So, show you that. Vincent and the Doctor. I think I might save this for some of my Whovian friends who have a lot of emotional ties to that specific episode. So I think if I tell them what it's based on, maybe they'll be interested in having me make something for them. As a way of, it sounds like I'm just trying to ingratiate myself into selections of people, which maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but that's enough waffling. Vincent and the Doctor. Second month's colorway is also on the same base, so I will try to put up a spoiler warning here since, like I said, this only arrived at my house yesterday. And this one is, spoiler. This is called Time Warrior, which is based off of the Third Doctor, John Pertwee, and one of his velvet jackets that he wears, and this is absolutely spot on. And one of his very first stories as the Doctor. So that's time travel. Time Warrior, excuse me. He's both. But I also got some more minis for my literary blanket from Canon Hand Dyes. These are from her adventure clubs from last year, which I've never gotten one before. It'll have to be something really special for me to just hunker down and get the full skeins of everything. But after each adventure club is done, she usually, what is with my nose? Releases mini sets based on all of those colors that she released to the club members during that time. So this is in the Charles base, which is what the majority of the minis that I have for those panels are. So I got Secret Garden. Trying not to get too much of a glare on there. With their new packaging, which I love. Feels like you're getting some cookies or candy or something. So Secret Garden. And also got Great Expectations, which is quite different, but equally as lovely, I think. Much more of a gothic-y feel through everything, which is right and fitting, let's be honest. So, if I can get them both up without blinding you all. So, those are my minis. And from Destination Yarn, I got another skein of Dragonstone. I am absolutely obsessed with this colorway. This time I got it on postcard base, which is one of her fingering bases. This is the 75-20 Superwash Merino Nylon. And I did get this for a specific purpose. I was thinking about the other skeins that I had that eventually were turned into those hats that I showed you, and was just absolutely enamored with the colorway, and was trying to think of what I could do with that application in a shawl. And then I thought, I'm trying to remember exactly my thought process on this. I can't remember all of it now. But then I thought of it being in a 2-color shawl and what you could do with that. And someone on a podcast must have just mentioned the Pure Joy shawl by Joji Locatelli. And I was thinking of having this as my main color, and then having, for the contrasting color, a really brilliant blue and purple in it. It works in my head, and I kept thinking about it. Thought, oh, that would be beautiful. And then I remembered, I have already a skein of brilliant blue and purple, which is the skein of Malabrigo Sock in Wales Road, which I also got in Portland not too long ago. So I hope this works in my head as in real life as well as it does in my head, but this is what I'm thinking of for A Pure Joy by Joji Locatelli. And I think I matched the bases pretty well based on construction and yardage. So hopefully those work together, but this is one of my dream knits that hopefully will be coming to you soon. And then there was a shop update from Gabby of Once Upon a Corgi. And I just love her yarn. And I resisted the last couple updates, which was really, really hard. But then she said in this update she'd be bringing back a colorway, which I have been kicking myself for not getting the first time it came around. So I put it in order. I'm not sorry. So the color that she was talking about was this gorgeousness. Let me pull this down a little bit so you can see how it transitions into these different purples here. And the green and the cream, it's just beautiful. So this is My Dear Abigail, which is inspired by one of her friends in her wedding colors, I think, if I recall correctly. So I got this on the penny base, which is her MCN. Like I said, I'm all about cashmere lately. I don't know what it is, because I got a skein of penny in My Dear Abigail. Like My Cold Dead Heart, which, I mean, I love it for the name anyway, but then it's just these scrummy burgundies with a little bit of black in there. And Something Sinister, which is all these grays and just a little bit of brown or I'm not sure, can't decide whether it's brown or beige in here, and a few speckles. So I would love to pair this up and get a skein in penny base of her, like, wait a minute, like my cold dead heart, dark like my soul. That's it. So sorry. So have this and this with that. It looks very dark navy blue for dark like my soul, and have these in a project all together. I'm not sure if it would be a cowl or a shawl, but some sort of 3-color project. I would love to have all 3 of them together in there. And then one more, I got Like My Cold Dead Heart on the ginger base, which is the 75 Superwash Merino 20 nylon, and then a 5% gold stellina, which I'm not sure if you can quite see in there. Oh yeah, a little bit. You can see it a little bit. So this is my corgi haul. I'm very, very happy with them. Alright, that finally takes care of that. Like I said, it's I'm just looking at them on the floor here. It's a little bit of a bit, but I do have plans for all of those, which most of them, which kind of makes it all right. Hopefully this will be the last big stash enhancements I have for a bit, and like I said, trying to focus more on working through my stash, and then just generally feeling better about myself, which is Always good, right? Through a strained smile. Anyway, I have just a tiny, tiny amount of dyeing to show you. So here is I'm Dying Inside, which you already saw. This is all I have to show you. I got some Dharma dyes, which I've been really excited to try out. Like I said, just to be able to work through a variety of dyes, see what I like and what I don't like, what I can mix and match. So I got 10 colors of Dharma. I'm just going to kind of work my way through them and make samples. So these are the samples that I made. These are just 10 of them. So far, I'm really impressed with Dharma dyes. I think they have a vibrancy and a complexity that I haven't seen before. I act like I've been doing this for 20 years. I've only been doing it for 2 months. Don't mind me being overly enthusiastic, but that's all I have to show you. I love this pink, obviously, right? Oh, never mind. All right, so now is the return of From the Vaults of the Theater, which is my Phantom of the Opera segment. As you might be able to tell from here, I am quite obsessed with Phantom of the Opera, and I thought I'd share some of that phantom-y goodness with you guys and start working through my collection of phantom-y things. The last time I had this segment, I focused on the souvenir brochures that I've accumulated from the performances I've gone to see. So this time I am going to be showing you my album collection of all things Phantom of the Opera. Get ready, guys. Sit tight. Okay. So the first album that I have to show you is the original stage musical, which you would think would be Andrew Lloyd Webber's version from 1986, but it's not. This is the original Ken Hill production of the Phantom of the Opera, which was started in 1976, if you believe it or not. I can't even remember where I got this. It's not impossible to find a physical copy of this, but you do have to work for it. This is the revival that was done in 1984. And what's interesting about this version is it's written by Ken Hill and lyrics by Ken Hill, but they use real opera arias and then put in original lyrics to further the story. So Phantom of the Opera is told using real operas, which I think is pretty creative. And with the exception of, the overture and some incidental music, it's all from real arias. And real operas, just like I said, with different lyrics, except when, because they do use Faust in this production, which is nice, nod to the original novel. In that case, they are just, the English translation of those lyrics. And when this came onto the London scene in 1984, they almost cast Sarah Brightman to be their Christine, which is greatly ironic, but perhaps fortuitous. Because of that, it attracted the attention of Andrew Lloyd Webber, her husband, and he and Ken Hill briefly talked about collaborating on a brand new production of this production to make a new musical, which those plans fell through, obviously, and Andy went on to his worldwide success. And this production has Peter Straker playing the Phantom. Here, I'll show you back there for the cast members. And, wait a minute. Sorry, this one was recorded in 1993 with Peter Straker. And he has a very interesting sound to his voice. The best way I can compare it to is if Andrew Lloyd Webber had actually cast Steve Harley as the Phantom instead of Michael Crawford, this is what he would have sounded like. And if you're not sure what that sounds like, if you can find the original music video that was made in the 80s with Sarah Brightman and Steve Harley performing the title song for Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, this is before any real production was started on the stage play, so it looks very, very different. It is one of the weirdest things you will ever see in your life. It's dripping 80s, everything. And Sarah Brightman and her eyes are more than a little scary. to me, but definitely go give that a watch and a listen. And it's a little surprising when you're used to Michael Crawford as the Phantom, but it is very insightful as to what could have been, which wouldn't have necessarily been a bad thing. It just was a very different thing, but that's what this guy sounds like to me, as if they had gone ahead and done that. And I really, like I said, like the fact that they used real opera arias in this. The characterization is interesting because they make Raoul not the Vicomte de Chagny, a nobleman. They make him the son of the stage manager, which is an interesting thing to try to play off of the social construct that's kind of essential to the story. And the Persian is in here, which is great. You never get to see him anymore. I'm sorry, it's glaring all over the place. And I'm rambling. So, Ken Hill, the Phantom of the Opera. Next is probably my most cherished Phantom album, which is the original The Phantom of the Opera. Oh, look. Fanception. Ha! Never mind. The original Phantom of the Opera London cast recording from 1986 with Michael Crawford, Sarah Brightman, and the late Steve Barton. I don't know what much more I can say about this because this is, for me, it's still the Phantom album. When I think of Phantom of the Opera, this is the cast that I think of. As good as some other production CDs that I have, this is what I grew up with. I'm surprised it's not worn to pieces. This is my childhood, really, right here. Which is a little strange to say out loud, but there it is. So it's the Polydor logo, which never changed on anything they ever made, I think. And I have the little booklet in here, which you can see the wear on the booklet more than on the cover. It has been taped together and restapled a few times because I went through it so many times trying to look at, for a while these were the only visual references that I had for what the stage play looked like that either I had not seen yet or I couldn't remember. And with all the lyrics, this was all I had to go on to try to recreate it in my mind. So this has been through a lot of love and wear and tear. So still the ultimate. Next is Das Phantom der Oper, which was the 1988 original Vienna cast album. This has Alexander Goebel, Luisa Nisler, and Alfred Pfeiffer, who plays Raoul in here. And I have a major voice crush on this guy. It's just, wow. Wow. So, I believe this was the second translation that they made from English into a foreign language. Japanese was the first one, and then I think it was like a week or two later that the Austrian production opened. And I completely lost my train of thought. Funny, a second ago I couldn't stop talking, now I can't think of anything to say. So here are some of their cast photos. Here is the original Canadian cast recording from 1990, which was in Toronto, with Colm Wilkinson, Rebecca Kane, and late Byron Nice. Which, I don't know why it's so awkward for me to listen to this, just because I think I know that Colm Wilkinson and Rebecca Kane played Jean Valjean and Cosette together in Les Mis just a few years before. So to try to reconcile that relationship that I imagine them having in here, it feels just a little bit weird. I probably should feel more weird about the actual relationship that these characters have, but that's what I decide to get hung up on. I don't know why. Who knows? So, that one. And another from 1990 is yet another version of the Phantom story. This is Phantom, the American musical sensation, which was written by Arthur Kopit for the story and Maury Yeston, who was the composer. And this is, in terms of maybe local theater, is what you will see more of, just because the rights for this came out much, much earlier than the Andrew Lloyd Webber version has. So if you wanted to do anything related to the Phantom of the Opera, it had to be this version. But this is... I'm trying to describe how I feel about this one. I do enjoy it. It's just an incredibly different feel from any other Phantom adaptation you will ever see or hear. Basically, the best way I've compared it to sometimes is if the rights, well, not even then, if the Phantom of the Opera had been picked up by MGM in its heyday and made it into a musical in the 40s, this is what it would have sounded like. This is how the story would have been adapted. So it's just a very different feel. And you kind of have to forget everything you know about the Phantom of the Opera. The only thing that this has in common with this, whoa, there. The only thing this has in common with this is that there is a guy in a mask who teaches a girl named Christine how to sing. That's pretty much the only thing they have in common. I mean, like I said, I do enjoy this. It's just so different from anything you'll know. There's not even a Raoul in this one. Oh, no. No. There is Philippe, who is not the Vicomte de Chagny, but the Comte de Chagny, and you put him up a notch. That is Christine's love interest in this version. And like I said, if even their romantic duet number is nothing like All I Ask of You. It's called Whoever Could Have Dreamed Up You, and it's this kind of just generally playful back and forth between the two of them that, like I said, that's, if MGM had done it, this is how it would have turned out. So it's very different. I still encourage you to give it a listen, because that will lead us on into the next thing that I will be telling you about. Also, Richard White plays the Phantom in this adaptation. And being a child of the 90s, the only other thing that I know him from is being the voice of Gaston in Beauty and the Beast by Disney. And trying to reconcile those two images of him, which is, you know, Phantom of the Opera is an offshoot of the Beauty and the Beast legend, to think of those two totally opposite roles in basically the same story formula, it messes with my head a little bit. But here, I'll show you the back there. So yeah, it's something to get used to, but definitely check it out. So also from 1990, I think we're done with 1990 after this one, is the only album that I don't have a physical copy of. I don't even know if you can get a physical copy of this anywhere, if they ever made one on CD, but it is you can get it on iTunes. That's how I have it. Is the film soundtrack, the soundtrack to the TV film made in 1990 by NBC, by John Addison, who is a great composer. So I'll see if I can get at least the album cover that I have up here. To kind of give you an idea of what that's for. And that's one of actually my favorite albums that I own. It's beautiful music, and it makes me nostalgic every time I listen to it, because the film that this is a soundtrack to was filmed actually in Paris in the Opera Garnier, which is where it is supposed to have taken place. So every time I listen, I remember, you know, which scene that matches through there, and just makes me think of that time that I was able to spend there. So like I said, this is the NBC film movie version, which still uses the same story from this play, just without music and musical numbers and whatnot. So it's the same story. Sorry, that flashed really hard. So that one is with Terry Polo, Burt Lancaster, and Charles Dance, which still boggles my mind to think that someone decided to put the three of them in a movie together. It works. I do enjoy the film. It's just, it always throws me for a loop trying to think of all three of them being in the same universe together. So, anyway, the John Addison TV soundtrack is absolutely gorgeous. Next is from 2000. We're finally done with 1990. El Fantasma de la Opera, which was the original Mexico cast album. Sorry, I'll try to... This is probably nicer than talking like this the whole time. With Juan Navarro, Erisima Terabas, and Jose Ho. Turn back there. This one is really interesting because they traditionally in the Andrew Lloyd Webber version, the Phantom is played by a tenor and Raoul is played by a baritone, which is also a play on traditional opera roles for what you would normally have as the hero and the villain. But they switched that for this one, so that's a nice contrast for singing styles that you normally hear. And then we move along to 2004, which was a very interesting yet controversial era in the Phantom of the Opera story, because that was the year where the film version was released. And being the nut that I am, I have not only the 1-disc, but the 2-disc special editions soundtracks of the 2004 movie, which of course starred Gerard Butler, Emmy Rossum, and Patrick Wilson. Not much more that I need to say about this, although I am so glad that this has the new orchestral pieces that were composed for the movie. Although probably the Fairground isn't actually a new one, because if you listen very closely in the play, you will hear this music over again, but it's just expanded on. Journey to the Cemetery, which is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. I love that so much. The sword fight, and then the single Learn to Be Lonely, which was sung by Minnie Driver during the end credits. I don't know why, well, I know why I had to do this, had to get this one, because I was absolutely obsessed with the film when it came out, despite the thoughts and feelings that I have about it now. Like I said, very controversial. I like to describe it that the stage version is my one true love, but I did have a brief torrid affair with the 2004 movie. I admit my mistakes and I have moved on, although I still appreciate it. The next year, in 2005, this album was released, which was called Fantasia, which there are only 2 tracks on this. This is, Fantasia is the first one, which is it's well over 30 minutes, a full suite, with Julian Lloyd Webber on cello, playing the part of Phantom and or Raoul, and Sarah Chang on violin, playing the part of Christine. It is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I almost wish that I could break it down into different tracks to focus in on the parts that I like the best, but you do need to listen to it as a whole. And then that also had, without these 2, an orchestral suite for The Woman in White, which is the next musical that Andrew Lloyd Webber produced at this point in time, which I am very glad to have that, because that's how I got introduced to The Woman in White, which is now one of my favorite books of all time. Completely beside the point, but Fantasia. And then sorry, I don't know what that's doing there. And the last one that I have is from 2011. That can't be right. Oh yeah, it is. Never mind. The last album I have is from 2011, which is, of course, the 25th anniversary of the London production of Phantom of the Opera. This was the concert that was staged at the Royal Albert Hall with Ramin Karimloo, Sierra Boggess, and Hadley Fraser. There they are, the lovelies. These 2 are adorable. I like this. I mean, I enjoyed the production immensely. I went to see it when it was broadcast live around the world in, my little corner of California here. But this is absolutely the most complete album that you will have, at least in English, of this production that you will find anywhere. So for that, I value it a lot. And the finale, of course, that after everyone's vows and everything, that had everybody. It had everybody in it. How about that? So this is very special to me as well. So that is everybody for my Phantom of the Opera album collection. Well, that brings us to the end of that. Thank you for sticking around for another episode today and for the Phantom goodness as well. If you enjoyed, I invite you to give us a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel down below. Thank you for spending time with me today. There are lots of different podcasts out there for knitting and even Phantom goodness that you could choose from. So thank you again for spending your time with me today. And wishing you happy knitting, happy living until the next time. I will see you then.